Hello, my friends, and welcome to another video from Karatul. My name is Arpit Pandit, and today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic which you will need for your CCIE lab and also in general for programmability is to run Python codes on your iOS XE device. So in this case, as you can see that I'm using CSR 1000V routers, and our point of interest would be the CSR2, this one, where we will be configuring the on-box Python. But before we do that, let's understand what do we mean by on-box Python and how does something called the Guestshell helps us into doing that. So I'll go to the example of this, what Guestshell mean and what exactly are we doing here. So basically the on-box Python means that uh, you will have your router, your iOS XE router, any kind of CSR, ASR router will be okay as long as it is running iOS XE. And this iOS XE router actually gives you a very interesting support. It can actually run inside this something called the Linux container. Let's just call that LXC. So Linux container, what does it mean? It means that inside the router, of course, we are running a module which is called iOS XE, and all your routing and basic router configuration, all the commands are supported into the iOS XE. But inside this box, we can create another container, separate container. So let's say, let's logically represent this router like a box. So this router, let's call it router 1, R1. Let's say this R1 is this box, and we have connectivity to the other routers using one of the interfaces, like let's say this is the gigabit Ethernet 1 interface, which is connecting to the rest of your network, right? So this is your normal router with the interface. You have your iOS XE running on this box. So what you can do and what Cisco allows you to do is to create another box inside this, or create another module inside this, which is completely separate from your iOS XE module, and this is called your Linux container, which is similar like a Docker, but this is dedicated for Linux, and in iOS XE actually it installs CentOS inside this Linux container. So you are going to initiate a complete full working Linux operating system, CentOS, Cent operating system inside your iOS XE box, and this will be like a separate logical machine. That means it's like a different logical box which is actually connected directly to your iOS XE, and the service that connects your iOS XE to your Linux container, because they are actually isolated, is this service is called IOX. So the very first thing that you need to do to install the Linux operating system CentOS inside your iOS XE box is to make sure that your IOX service is running, right? So what we're using is, just to show you again the setup that we have, is that basically we have this CSR2 which is connected to CSR1, and you can see the IP addressing we are using is 10.10.12, 12.1 and 12.2, simple. And then we have connectivity to our outside network using cloud, and we already have reachability outside, and we already have connectivity here. I have configured the default routes and the network address translation on CSR1, so I have connectivity. So let's just go to the CSR2 and let me show you that it already has the connectivity to outside world. So if I go to CSR2 here, and you can see it's router 2. So if I do a ping 8.8.8.8, you can see that I can already ping it. And also if I show you the name server, I have configured the name server as my hosting machine. This computer, this desktop where I'm running EVNG, that computer has IP address 0.1. So I can already ping with the names also. So let's say if I ping www.facebook.com or something, you can see that it can go to the DNS server, get the proper IP address, and can reach there. So basically we have the complete internet connectivity here. You don't need internet connectivity to get the Guestshell running. It can be a completely isolated router. You can spin up the Guestshell or the Linux container. But I wanted it so that in case if we need the latest Python, or at least the Python version 3, it might be very useful to have the internet connectivity. So inside the Linux box, inside the CentOS, we can update all the different modules or different softwares, right? So the basic idea here, as you can see, is that first of all we need to run the IOX service, And this service is responsible for enabling communication between your iOS XE and your Linux CentOS. And this CentOS environment is actually known as Guestshell, right? So this Guestshell is nothing but your CentOS, which is running inside your iOS XE machine. So the concept is that once you activate iOS, and then you can install different kind of app service applications. Like CentOS is one of the application, right? One of the softwares, and this is actually known as the app hosting. So you will see the name app hosting, and this app hosting is what we are doing here. This app that we are going to install or to set up inside this, you will be able to see this with the show app hosting list command. But for that, your iOS must be running. So if I just show you the command line of router 2 CSR2 right now, if I show iOS service, you can see that the iOS service is not running, right? iOS service for CF and iOS man, these are not running, and these must be running for your app hosting, different kind of app hosting. And that's why if I show you show app hosting list, it says that the process for the command is not responding or is otherwise unavailable, because this can only work if your iOS is running fast, right? So first of all, let's activate iOS. And how do you do that? Very simple. Just go to the configuration mode and type the command iOS, and then you can come back and you can see that it's saying that the server iOS has been notified to start. It takes a little bit time, so you can check show iOS service, and you can see that now iOS CF is running, but your iOS manager is still not running, right? iOS man. So you need to wait for another message which says that iOS is completely started. The iOS is starting is successful, and then you will be able to run this command show app hosting list, that which apps you are running on your system. So the idea would be to enable communication between your Linux box and your iOS XE, because of course the Linux box needs to also have access to outside world. So how do we do that? So first of all, we will activate iOS that we just did, and it will be activated soon. After that, you need to actually create a virtual interface on your iOS XE, and that will be like the gateway between the iOS XE and CentOS. And this virtual interface is actually known as virtual port group. Virtual port group. So just like virtual interfaces we use in PPP and all, this virtual port group is used to connect to your CentOS that you will be installing. So this virtual port group is just like another logical interface inside your iOS XE. Show IP interface brief, you will be able to see it here. And what we are going to do is we are going to use this to connect to our CentOS, which is known as the Guestshell. So the Guestshell will actually have another interface here inside this, and this Guestshell interface will be called the guest interface, guest hyphen interface. So let's say guest interface 0, and this is virtual port group 0. And then you will need to enable communication between them by putting them into the same network. So let's say virtual port group 0, we will configure IP address 10.10.20.1, and the guest interface will have the IP address 10.10.20.2/24, right? So you can see that 20.1 and 20.2, they are into the same network. Basically the Linux which we are running inside has the interface guest interface, this one, and the iOS XE has the interface virtual port group 0, which will be connecting to your Linux shell. And then you will see we need to configure some app hosting commands to tell our Linux server or Linux operating system that hey, your gateway is 10.10.21. That's where you need to go if you want to connect to iOS XE, or if you want to get out and go to the outside world, right? So that's what you will need. And because we are using a network 10.10.20 and the traffic is going out of your router from gigabit Ethernet 1 to actually another router, as you can see into this diagram. So on this particular device CSR1, I have configured a static route for 10.10.20 pointing to router 2, because that's where we will configure that network. And of course router 1 has a default route pointing to the internet in that case, right? So let's go back to router, and you can see, so I typed just the command iOS. I waited for a few minutes, and you can see in a minute it says that iOS is ready, right? So now if you run the command show iOS service, first of all you need to make sure that the iOS service are running. This high availability we don't need to run. right? And now if I run the command show app hosting list, you can see that no app found. So that's good. That means at least the app hosting concept is working, and now we are going to have some app installed. Alright, so the very first thing that we will do here, you will see, is that we are going to create this virtual port group so that we have a gateway into the Guestshell, and then we will spin up the CentOS. So that means 10, 10, 21. This is the IP address for virtual port group. So what I'll do is, right now if I show IP interface brief, you can see that it doesn't have any virtual port group interface. So configuration terminal, interface, virtual port group, and then you can give it a number. Let's say virtual port group 0. I'm inside the interface. I will configure the IP address 10.10.20.1/24, no shutdown, and that's it, right? It's a simple IP addressing and no shutdown on the virtual port group. Let me show you again. Show IP interface brief. Now you can see that there's a virtual port group and the IP address is there. Now we need to link this virtual port group to our guest interface, right? And this guest interface here will be configured as one of the app hosting service. So you see that the command structure also is with the app ID. So if I go to the configuration terminal and if I type app, you can see that we have an option of app hosting, right? So I click on app hosting, you press enter, and then enter application name up to 40 alphanumeric characters. This is the Guestshell application we will create, right? So we will say app hosting app ID, and the name we want to give is Guestshell. So we see that we are inside that app hosting parameter. Now here, the very first thing you need to do is you need to create a virtual interface inside the Linux, which is guest interface. But also you need to tell who will be your gateway. So the gateway for the Linux will be this virtual port group, right? So how we do this is we use the command app vnic, and you specify the gateways. So you can have up to 4 gateways, as you can see. Let's say we want to give gateway 0. So you can see that gateway has to be a virtual port group that we had created. So virtual port group 0 is our gateway. And now we say that what kind of interface do you want to create? So we want to create a guest interface, guest-interface, and let's name it also 0. So we are inside the guest interface. So now the guest interface is created, which is actually linked to the virtual port group we have created, and that virtual port group is nothing but the gateway for our guest interface, right? So here you will see that we have the option to configure a guest IP address, and that's exactly what we want to do. The guest IP address means we already configured the virtual port group address 10.10.21. Now we need to configure the guest interface IP address, which is 10.10.20.2, right? So guest IP address, and IP address is 10.10.20.2. Net mask is /24. You can see that's the one. So we configured the IP address here, and then we exit from this interface. So what we did here, as you can see, is that we first of all told the system that the guest interface 0, which will be created for Linux environment, it will have the gateway as virtual port group 0, and this is your gateway number 0, right? And then inside this configuration we configured the IP address for this guest interface. But one thing is missing is that, okay, we told the system that virtual port group 0 will be your gateway, but what is the IP address of this gateway? So we use the command app default gateway, and then you can see that we can configure the IP address of the virtual port group. So we can say 10.10.20.1, that will be your gateway, and this gateway is actually associated with the guest interface 0, and that's it, right? Guest interface 0 will have this address. Some other things that you can do are configuring the name server if you want, like DNS servers, if you need a named resolution as well. So let's say name server, I'm just going to configure name server as 8.8.8.8, the Google DNS server. That's it. So that's it. You configure the things. Let me show you that. To show run section app hosting, and you can see all we did is we created a new app ID called Guestshell, and under this we said that this create a guest interface and link it to the gateway virtual port group 0, and the guest interface IP address we mentioned, and then also that what is the IP address of the virtual port group, what is the IP address of default gateway, that will be 10.10.21 linked to guest interface 0, right? And if optionally you can also configure the DNS server IP address here. So that's the very first thing we did. Now currently if I go ahead and check show app hosting list, you can see that still no app found. Why? Because we created the Guestshell environment, but we still haven't spin up the Linux system. We need to activate the Linux system. That means we have to activate this Guestshell that we have just created the app. You have the option to activate it, deactivate it, install it, uninstall it, completely destroy it. What do you want to do with it? You have the option. So right now it's not working. It's just defined what will be the IP address of the interface if we bring up the Guestshell. So since, currently, of course, we don't have that Guestshell running. It's just defined that what will be the IP address of it, what will be the gateway IP address, but it's not running right now. So if you want to enable it, what you do is you just type the command Guestshell, and then you can see that we have option of enable, right? Guestshell enable, and we can destroy it also, completely uninstall the complete service package if we later want to do it. We can disable it, we can destroy it, we can enable it. So we type the Guestshell enable, you can see that interface will be selected if configured in app hosting, which we have done, and please wait for the completion. So here we have to wait for some time, and once this is done, you will see a message that the Guestshell is ready. Basically what's happening is that now your system is bringing up the Linux CentOS, a complete environment there, which you can run all the Linux commands, including the one which we are interested, the onbox Python, right? So basically onbox Python is nothing but Python, which is running on the box, on the router itself. All the important parameters and everything uninstalled. So let's wait for it. So you can see that it is completely activated and it's running. Guestshell is up. And now if I type the command show app hosting list, you can see that the Guestshell is running. So how do you access this Guestshell? Now how do you access this Linux container? So currently if I show you show IP interface brief, I have virtual port group, and if I ping 10.10.20.2, which is the Linux, right, Linux box, which is connected, so you can see that we can reach there. That means your Linux box is up and running. But how do we access that? So for accessing that, we use the command Guestshell run, and then you have to mention what do you want to run. You can run directly the Python module from here by typing the command Guestshell run Python, or you can go to the actual bash environment by typing the command Guestshell run bash. If you type this, you get to the complete Linux Guestshell, just like your CentOS, a complete Linux command structure will be available here, right? So the reason I came here instead of going to the Python, like in the exam, you will directly go to the Python. It's just to show you that if we have the proper Python installed or not. So if I check Python-v, the version, currently it has 2.7.5 installed. And in the exam, you have Python version 3, right? So let's see if Python 3 is installed. Say that Python 3 command not found. So it doesn't have Python version 3. So one thing you should do, like if you're practicing, is that you can, because you have internet connectivity, we can check it. We can ping internet right from here because of netting and default routing. Let's check if the DNS is also working. Let's say if I want to ping with the name. Yeah, DNS is also working fine. So what you can do is you can use the command sudo, so that it actually runs the command from the root credentials, and we can use the command yum install Python 3. That is something we can do to install Python 3. Right, so let's see. Okay, so it has started already installing Python. So because we have internet connection, we can do this. The reason is because Python version 2 and Python version 2 syntax is not compatible. Some things are changed, and in the exam they're expecting you to use Python version 3. So it's better to have Python 3 if you are practicing. If you go to for the exam, they will already have Python version 3 there. You don't need to manually bring it up, right? But just in this case, we are installing it. So let's wait for it to complete. And then I will show you that if you want to access Python directly instead of going to the bash, we can do that as well. All right, so as you can see that Python 3 is installed. Now if I run the command version Python 3 version v, sorry, -v, it says that I have installed the Python 3.6.8. I think the latest version is going on 3.10, but it's fine as long as it is version 3. You should be able to run these things. Now, as you remember, I had come into this bash shell using the command guestshell run bash. I can exit from here, go back to my router, and then I can run the command guestshell run Python, and directly I will get into the Python. But if I type this command, you can see that it is taking me under the default version it has 2.7.5, right? So what I can do is I can exit from here and I can run the command guestshell run python 3. So then it will take me directly into the python 3 module that I have just installed, python 3.6.8, right? From here you can use all your Python commands and actually create scripts also and execute those scripts like this one, right? So that was the basic idea about how we can use Guestshell to have an on box completely running Python. All right, so just to summarize it up again, we have just spin up the guest shell here, and we have configured a guest interface with 10.10.22, which has complete connectivity to iOS XE, and we can run the guest shell run command to get into the Python module by guest shell run Python or guest shell run Python 3 or guest shell run bash if you want to get to the Linux host. Right now, as you can see that currently, if I check show app hosting list, Guestshell is running. What I can do is I can type the command Guestshell disable, and if I do that, then it will disable Guestshell service package, so we will not be able to use it. And you can check it into the show app hosting list that it is deployed, but it's not running. And then finally, I can also go ahead and do the Guestshell destroy. And then if you do that, it is going to completely delete Guestshell. But I don't want to do it right now, as we will be using it for our further practicals for the Python. So thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you into the next one.